you're siding with the assassins. But the twist is that ultimately you end up rooting for the king of Qin because he is going to go on and create modern China.
Yeah.
And therefore, without him, there will be no China. And this sense of the first emperor as someone who, I mean, weirdly, so in 1973, so this is towards the end of Mao's life, Chairman Mao's life, there was an editorial published in the Maoist journal, The Red Flag, which described the first emperor burning books and burying Confucian scholars alive as progressive measures, which is amazing.
Yeah, robust measures for a happier China.
Exactly. And even now, it's not only filmed, there's been 4 TV series about the first emperor. So William Han, you remember who I met in when we were in Auckland?
I do, yeah.
Chinese New Zealander, wrote a brilliant travelogue about his travels across from China to the Middle East. But he said about this, Caesar would love this kind of attention.
Yeah.
And I guess the parallels between China and Rome are why I'm interested in it.
Yeah. And the communist stuff is fascinating. We'll come to that towards the end of the program, the way in which in Mao's China,
yes,
the reputation of the first emperor changed. But let's start. Tom, where are we? We are 300 years or so, 250 years before the birth of Christ.
We are.
So Rome is a republic at this point, and China doesn't exist. What is now China is a series of warring states. Is that right?
Yeah, so there are 7 warring states. As we said, the man who becomes the first emperor is the king of Qin. Under his rule, Qin conquers the other 6 states, and it is seen by the other 6 states as pretty barbaric.
Right.
The story goes that the founder of the kingdom was a chieftain who was expert in horse breeding, which is a kind of very barbarian thing to do.
Yeah.
Who gets given this, this tranche of land, and then Qin grows and grows and ends up swallowing all the other kingdoms. And you mentioned Rome.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a slight sense there of how the Greeks, for instance, will see the expansion of Rome. So Rome at this period is busy fighting against Carthage, but also Macedon is the other parallel.
I was about to say Macedon. So Macedon, which is on the northern fringe of the kind of Hellenic world, the Greek world, and then ends up dominating. Qin is the same, right? It's more warlike, it's more rugged.
Yes.
And the others regard it as perhaps a bit backward, a bit uncouth, but those martial virtues are what make it successful.
Yes. And so this may well be why once the king of Qin has conquered the other 6 kingdoms, I mean, he's not reticent in proclaiming the scale of what he's achieved. So on his inscriptions, he boasts that he brought peace to all under the heavens and that he has humbled the mighty and rebellious and brought stability to the 4 ends of the earth. There's a sense in which his dynasty only lasts another 4 years after his death.
Right.
But as we say, there is another sense in which what he has established will last until 1911, when the last Chinese emperor is deposed.
Yeah, Puyi.
And I think that it is really right to focus in on how unusual this sense of continuity is, because obviously the Roman Empire vanishes, there is no trace of it. The Caliphate fragments and fractures. India is never a coherent whole until the British period. But in China, even though the empire may implode, may fragment, may fracture, it always kind of comes back together again. And I think you have this sense that from this period on, a unified empire is seen by the Chinese as really the only legitimate form of rule. And so that in turn kind of raises 2 really, really interesting questions. And the first is, how did the first emperor do this? How did he succeed in establishing such a kind of enduring model of imperial rule, a model that would last for not just centuries, but millennia? But also that question that is focused by the passage from Borges that you read at the beginning, has he abolished history?
Yeah.
Is it year 0? Or is he drawing on traditions that are much older than him?
Yeah. So Borges was obviously fascinated by this idea that it was a year 0, that the emperor was starting again. And, it's one that's very seductive. Chinese history obviously predates that first emperor. So am I right in thinking the Chinese chronology, that goes back thousands of years before this guy?
Yeah, it's all before him. So Borges in his essay points this out. I mean, this is why he finds it so unsettling, the idea of abolishing history, is because Borges recognizes that for the Chinese, in a sense, history is more important to the Chinese, tradition is more important to the Chinese than to any comparable civilization.
Yeah.
And so he writes in that essay, Chinese chronology was already 3,000 years long and included the Yellow Emperor, Changzu, Confucius, Lao Tzu, when Shi Huangdi ordered that history would begin with him. And so what he's doing there, he's citing an emperor and 3 sages,
right,
all of whom obviously had preceded the first emperor. So the Yellow Emperor is a kind of legendary culture hero who's basically a kind of divine figure, like, Osiris ruling Egypt at the beginning of the line of the pharaohs.
Right.
Chuang-Tzu and Lao Tzu, they were both alive during the Warring States period before the first emperor ends that. And they are exemplars of Taoism or Taoism. They follow the Tao, the way. And the aim of this is to bring heavens and the earth and everything in it into harmony. And it has to be said that they are not obvious guides to a stable world empire.